They say the West is filled with danger, but no one warns you about the kind that hides behind lace curtains and the scent of cinnamon bread. Jonas Trellin wasn't looking for love, or salvation, or even a second chance. He just needed a dry place to rest after riding 2 states worth of wind and regret. When he spotted the soft lamplight glowing from a house that looked half forgotten by time, he thought it was a blessing. But what he didn't know was that someone inside had been waiting for him, not just for one night, for years. What if the place you stumbled into was the place you were meant to return to all along? Behind that door wasn't just shelter, it was a memory, a girl now woman who once whispered her love and was never answered. Now she's older, wiser, bruised but not broken, still cooking for others, still praying over every plate. But life hasn't been easy for Rosemary. She was once promised to a man who left her standing with her hands full of bread and no name to carry. And yet she stayed kind, stayed soft, kept the porch light burning. Now Jonas has returned, not remembering the girl she once was, but something in her voice, something in her hands stirs a past he buried beneath years of drifting and war. She's been cooking for travelers for 18 winters, but the one man she fed with love never knew it. Until now. So what happens when a man running from the past walks straight into it? And what happens when a woman who spent decades loving in silence finally speaks? This isn't a story of revenge. It's not even a story of redemption, not exactly. It's a story of recognition, of hands weathered by work still reaching, of a heart left waiting, quietly beating. Will he remember? Will she forgive? And what secret has the girl been keeping all these years? This is the rancher just wanted a place to sleep. But those women had other plans. Stay with us, because what comes next might just heal something in you too. The storm had rolled in low and mean, the kind that didn't just wet your hat, but soaked into your bones like regret. Jonas Trellin, a broad-shouldered rancher in his early 60s, tugged his coat tighter as his horse trotted up the hill. He wasn't looking for trouble, only a place to rest. The prairie had been silent for miles, save for the sound of wind scraping across dry land. He had buried his last cow 3 days ago, and if he didn't find work or a roof, soon winter would bury him too. In the distance, through streaks of rain and dust, he spotted a house that seemed like it had been waiting for something or someone. A widow's place, maybe. Quiet, worn, still standing. He didn't know that someone inside had lit the stove that morning, not for themselves, but for him. Inside the home, Martha Keene, 52, stirred the pot of stew like she had every night for 7 years, always enough for two. Her daughter Rosemary watched her in silence, mending a blanket they didn't need mended anymore. "Will he come?" Rosemary asked, same as she did every winter since that rider passed their gate without stopping. Martha didn't answer. Hope makes fools of women, but she still lit 2 plates. So when Jonas knocked, drenched and quiet, Martha didn't gasp. She simply opened the door and stepped aside. "You're late," she whispered. She didn't know why she said it, only that her voice hadn't sounded that alive in years. He came looking for shelter, but found 2 women who seemed to know him without ever meeting. Jonas Trellin stepped through the threshold like a man entering church, not with fear, but with weight on his shoulders he didn't know how to set down. The house smelled of thyme and cedar smoke. Not perfume, but care. Something home-like, though he hadn't known home in 20 years. Martha Keene handed him a towel, not asking his name, just saying dry off. Supper's warm. It wasn't kindness for show. It was the sort born from habit. The kind you give to someone whose arrival you've imagined 1,000 nights over the sound of wind. Jonas sat at the table, and Rosemary, now close to 30, poured coffee like she'd done it for him before. She didn't smile. Just studied him with an ache that didn't belong to her. "This house," Jonas said, finally breaking the silence, "feels like it remembers things." "It does," Martha replied gently. "It remembers who's come and who should have." Jonas didn't ask what she meant. A man who's lived long on the trail learns not to poke too deep when the fire's just lit. They ate without fanfare. The stew was modest, but it sat in his stomach like mercy. After Martha pointed him toward the back room. "There's a bed made up. Sheets'll be cold but clean. You're safe here." Safe. A word he hadn't heard in years. He touched his hat in gratitude. "I'll be gone at first light." "You were supposed to be gone years ago too," she said softly, eyes never leaving the fire. Jonas paused, but Martha said no more. He thought it was a place to pass through, but the way they looked at him made it feel like he'd already left something behind. That night, Jonas Trellin couldn't sleep. The mattress was soft, the roof didn't leak, and for once coyotes kept quiet. But it wasn't peace that kept him awake. It was the feeling that Martha Keene knew something about him he hadn't even spoken. The old cedar wardrobe in the corner held a wool coat too small for a man too fine for a ranch hand. It smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. On the windowsill sat a worn envelope. Jonas turned it over. His name. Jonas Trellin scrawled in ink that had faded but still knew who he was. He didn't open it. In the morning over biscuits and eggs, Rosemary barely looked at him. She moved like she'd memorized the space around him, where the coffee cup should go, where his hand might rest on the table. Jonas cleared his throat. You said this place don't get many travelers. We don't, Martha replied calmly. But that room was made up. Martha didn't answer. She just wiped her hands on her apron and turned back to the stove. Then softly, almost to herself, it's been ready 17 years. Jonas felt the eggs turn in his stomach. You mistook me for someone else. No, Martha said, meeting his eyes with a quiet force that rattled him more than gunfire. We hoped you'd be someone else, but we knew you'd be you. He looked to Rosemary, but she was already walking out the back door, braids swinging like a metronome of heartbreak. He hadn't known her before, but she sure seemed to know him. And the part of him he kept buried, the part that used to be gentle, stirred awake. He didn't recognize the past waiting in that house, but it remembered him just fine. The rain had stopped by midday, but Jonas didn't saddle his horse. He walked the ridge instead, boots scuffing red dust mined, circling what Martha had said. 17 years. He did the math in his head. 17 years ago, he was still breaking Mustangs for soldiers running from anything that felt like home, burning every bridge he crossed. One of those bridges he now suspected had led here. That night, Rosemary left a basket outside his door, fried catfish cornbread and a note that read, "The room you're sleeping in." It used to be for someone we never got to meet. But we told her stories about you anyway. Every birthday, every Christmas, every night she cried herself to sleep. We told her you were out there trying to find your way back. Jonas read it once, then again, and still couldn't breathe right. He opened the old cedar wardrobe, pulled down the lavender coat, and found a faded photograph in the pocket. A girl, maybe 6, wide, dark eyes, a chin shaped like his own. A daughter. He sank to the edge of the bed, the willow-patterned quilt crinkling beneath him. She'd had his name all along, and he hadn't even known. At dawn, he found Martha in the kitchen. I need to see her, he said, voice hoarse. Martha looked up from her jar of preserves. You are seeing her? Rosemary stood behind him, holding a cloth bundle. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a blue ribbon, wrapped around a lock of dark hair, the same shade as his. He came for shelter, but found the weight of 17 silent years, and a girl who used to call him father. The barn was quiet, save for the rustle of hay and the gentle shifting of the mare in her stall. Jonas stood there with the letter in his hands, creases worn soft with time, ink faded like breath. It had been tucked inside the ribbon bundle Rosemary had given him, along with the lock of hair. Jonas, I don't know if this will ever find you. I don't even know if you'd want it to. But you should know this much: you have a daughter. Her name is Lila. She has your stubborn eyes and your way of watching everything before saying a word. I won't ask anything from you except that you remember you were loved once, and that part of you still walks this earth. Rosemary. He folded it slowly, like it might tear from a sorrow alone. Outside, Lila No Rosemary was sitting on the old swing beneath the walnut tree. She rocked gently, hands knotted in her lap. The blue ribbon was tied in her hair now. Jonas stepped out the screen door, creaking behind him. I don't blame you, she said before he could speak. But I used to. He sat on the porch step, not quite ready to stand beside her. I didn't know, he said. I didn't know about you, about any of this. You didn't ask. Her voice was soft, not cruel, just tired. You ran. Mama told me you were scared, not bad. But when you didn't write back, I started to wonder if you just didn't care. He looked down at his hands. Rough, empty. I thought I'd ruin anything I touched. She looked up at that eyes brimming but steady. You didn't ruin me. A long silence settled between them, weighted yes, but strangely gentle. Finally, she stood brushing dust from her skirt. Mama made peach cobbler. You still like it? He blinked. I don't know what I like anymore. Well, she said, and this time her smile reached her eyes, then, maybe you'd best come inside and relearn. He came face to face with what he'd lost, and found a woman strong enough to offer him a second chance. The kitchen of Magnolia Rest had never smelled so warm. Cinnamon butter, the faintest trace of wood smoke. Rosemary moved about with the steadiness of someone who had made peace with the past, even if the past hadn't made peace with her. Her daughter sat beside Jonas at the long oak table, handing him mismatched forks and smiling shyly when their fingers brushed. He'd expected anger. Instead, he found rhythm. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't furious with you for years, Rosemary said, as she stirred the pot on the stove. But fury don't feed a child, and it sure as heck don't plant potatoes. Jonas smiled faintly. You've built something good here. We did, she corrected gently, nodding toward Lila. We made a life. Not the one we planned, but the one that stayed. He swallowed hard. I should have written. Should have come back sooner. You couldn't, she said plainly. You were drowning, and I was too proud to throw the rope. The room fell quiet for a while. Not awkward, not sad, just honest. After dinner, Lila brought out a photo album, worn leather pages yellowing. Each picture was a time capsule: Lila in a flour-smeared apron, Rosemary holding a pie by the window, a dog Jonas never met named Copper lying by the porch. As they turned the pages, Jonas reached a photograph that caught his breath. It was Rosemary Young, radiant, standing in front of a painted backdrop with a rifle slung across her shoulder. Her eyes sparkled even in black and white. You were always braver than I was, he whispered. She looked over his shoulder. No, I was just too stubborn to stay broken. Later, when the fire had died down and Lila had gone upstairs, Jonas stood in the doorway watching Rosemary wrap the leftover pie. You want to stay? She asked without turning around. He didn't answer at first. I don't want to run anymore. She turned then slowly and looked at him, not with pity, not with longing, but with something softer. Trust beginning to thaw. Well, she said, we're short one pair of hands for winter, and the roof leaks on the left side. He nodded. I fix roofs. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that carried years in it. Not regret roots. He'd wandered all his life looking for shelter. Now he was being offered something stronger than a roof, a place to belong. The first snow came early that year, dusting the porch steps like powdered sugar. Jonas stood outside with a hammer in one hand and a crooked shingle in the other. The roof finally mended the ache in his shoulders, oddly comforting. Behind him, laughter drifted from the kitchen. Rosemary's low chuckle, Lila's brighter giggle, the clink of spoons and Sunday crockery. This wasn't the life he thought he'd return to. It was better. Rosemary brought him coffee in a cracked blue mug, steam rising in the pale light. She wore that same old shawl, edges frayed, but it still held warmth like a promise. He took the cup and their hands brushed. Not by accident, not anymore. You sleeping all right, she asked. Better than I have in 20 years. There was no need to say more. Not after what they'd shared: grief, forgiveness, the kind of quiet rebuilding that doesn't come with fanfare, only with steady mornings and warm bread. Lila joined them, arms full of firewood. She smiled shyly at Jonas, and he smiled back as natural as if he'd been smiling at her for years. Rosemary leaned against the porch rail. Lila's thinking of applying to that teaching school in Butte. Says she wants to learn, come back and open a schoolhouse for girls. Jonas looked at the girl, then back at Rosemary. She's got your heart. She's got your eyes. They both laughed, quiet, teary. The kind of laughter that grows out of pain, not in spite of it, but through it. As twilight settled over the prairie, Jonas lit the lantern by the door. The porch light stayed on that night, not because anyone was expected, but because someone had finally come home. Sometimes what we run from becomes the place we return to. And sometimes the love we thought we lost is still waiting on a porch light to guide us back. There are people who are meant to stay for a night, but then stay in your heart forever. Jonas thought he just needed a porch to keep out the rain, but it turns out what he needed was a place to remember who he used to be. Rosemary, for all those years cooking for strangers, only waited for one person to sit down at the table. not to thank her, but to look at her as if she had never been left. Their story reminds us that true love doesn't need noise. It just needs the other person to still be there, waiting for you to return. And no matter how far life takes us, there are places people still gently holding space for us in silence. If this story makes you think of someone who once loved you quietly, or makes you believe that there is still love for broken hearts, then perhaps you are like them, also quietly hoping. Subscribe to Nun Wild West Saga to hear more healing stories like this. Would you like to see a sequel? Or is there a topic you would like to see covered in a story? Share in the comments. We read every line.